we can start with our consent agenda, which involves both the previous minutes as well as a round of policies. Any discussion or questions about the previous minutes or policies? Morgan or Lynn, I had just a quick clarification question around the collection of delinquent meal charges. And I assume we kind of maintain this policy even though we have universal free lunch across the district. And I just would love to kind of understand why we still need such a policy if we have lunch covered for students.
I think it is primarily for the cash only pieces because there are some charges if students choose a la carte or if they purchase an extra milk
Yeah.
like that. We had to make some changes. I thought we were going to be able to delete this policy, but when we looked through it, it does not appear so. Morgan, do you have anything you want to add?
Nope, that's exactly it.
Okay. Thanks.
You do now have Kat in the meeting, and Lisa is attempting to join.
Oh, okay, great.
You also have Lenny, and Christy is struggling with Wi-Fi. She'll be on in a bit.
I'm here.
Okay, great. And now Lisa is as well. Okay. So any other discussion around the prior minutes or any of these policies? And if not, a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I'll make that.
Okay, thanks, Erin. I'll do this by roll. Kat? Is Kat with us or no? I misunderstood.
She is on.
Huh, okay. Well, I'll come back to her. Erin?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Miranda?
Yes.
Lisa?
My apologies, I did not hear the motion. Is it to accept the minutes?
Minutes and policies, yes.
The answer is yes. I
Thank
approve.
you. Thank you. And Arlene?
Yes.
And Kat, are you with us? Okay, great. And Miranda, did I call on you? Sorry.
You did.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Anyone, Lynn, do you feel any need to reprioritize the flow of the evening?
I don't, and I just want to apologize to Christy. I said Christy, but I meant Rhoda when I said having technical difficulties.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But Rhoda's trying to get on.
Okay, great. And then let's see, for our recognition of visitors and public comment, I see that we have Jared Valancourt. Jared, would you like to speak this evening?
Jared does not have microphone capability. He sent me a message just saying that they're just tuning into the meeting.
Okay, all right. Morgan, is that it? My screen's a little funny. I can't quite see everyone in the gallery.
That's it for visitors.
Okay. Okay, so no public comment this evening. Okay, so then that brings us to the Sheldon School Spotlight with Christy.
All right. Well, if I can share my screen, that would be great.
You should have that now.
Excellent. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me. There we go.
Now we can see it.
Excellent. Sometimes our pictures are in the way. So I put a couple things together into this one. So it may not seem like it's all connected, but we continue to try to find ways to connect to our greater community. And we've typically done a lot of community service, and that's been just a little bit harder the past couple of years with some of the restrictions. And so, so we're trying to kind of take a little bit of a different approach. So I'm going to talk about 3 different things that in one way or another connect to our larger community. The middle school Getting to Why leadership group, our Tucked In Tuesday campaign, and our November Gratitude Challenge. So we continue to try to connect to our greater community, doing some outreach, and our strong social media presence helps us do that as well. So Getting to Why, I feel like I missed a slide, but I'm just going to go with it. Getting to Why is a middle school leadership group that looks at the youth risk behavior survey and analyzes the data that they get from that. So that survey is middle school students in our supervisory union. So it isn't just Sheldon School, and it's not just Sheldon students, but it is what's happening in that area, in our area, in terms of risky behaviors around youth. What are they, what areas are we really strong in? And what areas are there things that we should be putting in place as a community to address those concerns? So we sent a group of students to the YRBS Getting to Why Leadership Conference, and Joanna Jaros took them. And so the next couple slides, I'm not going to read them all to you, and I'm happy to share it all because I only shared it with Morgan and Lynn. I'm happy to share it all, but I'm just going to pull out a few things. And I asked students to just do a little reflection on their experience. So Storm, one of our 8th graders, just remarked that being kind gets you further in life than being rude and cruel, which I was like, yes, it does. And maybe it doesn't always feel like that. But that was an aha moment for him, especially when he was working with some of the other students. Chloe, I can't wait to go again and do some new things. And since I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone, I thought this would help me, and it did. So thank you to Mrs. Jaros. They met with other students from around the state and got to go to the State House and got to meet with YRBS leaders and really talk through the data that they are looking at from our area. Hallie Robtoy. One thing I learned at the YRBS training is that once we retrieve all of our data and it gets analyzed, we put on a dialogue night where we teach all that we learned and report out on the results of the survey. So these students are going to lead a dialogue night with our community. And it's been a couple of years since we've done one of those, but it is amazing. And they do a great job. So they're going to share the 3 behaviors that students in our area are strong in, right? Like wearing a seatbelt. That the last time we did this work, that was one of them, that over 90% of the kids said they wear a seatbelt. And then they're going to look at, the areas where maybe we need a little bit more of a community presence to really think about what can we do to make an impact. And the last time we met, there was one of the things that came up was that kids rode in the car while other adults were smoking. And so we did an anti-smoking campaign, and we had some posters made that were on the side of our buses. And so it'll be interesting. I don't know, because I didn't read their analysis, but I'm hoping that we've made some progress in that area. Grady Boyle, I'm excited to learn about other people's struggles and come up with ways to help them with it. So how can we be part of our community when we know something is something's wrong? Hayden Lesky, it can help me be more aware about these kinds of things that I don't really think about. So I don't usually think about all these things, and understanding the kinds of risky behaviors that might seem kind of low level, but are the kinds of things that if those happen a lot, then some of the other ones go up. And then Ella Kane, something I learned is that this is why we started Rec Night here at school. So we do a Rec Night. It's usually once a month, and it starts after school and goes till 6 o'clock. We do some kinds of, games or activities, try to be outside, especially now, and have some food. And it just gives kids a chance to hang out and be together. We used to do dances. Those are okay once or twice a year, but you can't do them once a month. And kids don't even, that's not fun for them, right? Those are things that they think are special. And so our rec nights have been pretty popular and well attended. Oh, why am I not? There we go. Madison Rainville, I'm excited to help kids in our school and our community. And Haley Carey, I really enjoy hearing other schools' thoughts on the data. So they had to present out to other schools. They had to share what they learned about their area and community, and hear about other communities as well. Oh, that was it. Sorry. No smooth transition here tonight, I guess. Tucked in Tuesday, a completely different end of the spectrum. Tucked in Tuesday is an effort to ensure all students pre-K3 have access to high quality stories read to them at home. If families are connecting to the school, learning who we are, and enjoying a moment together, it is worth it. And every Tuesday at 7:15, we post on our Facebook page a link to a YouTube video, which has one of our staff members reading a story. It is mostly targeted to our pre-K3, pre-K2 grade levels. We've been talking about doing a chapter book for middle school, but we haven't quite got there yet, but we certainly can add that on. This is our librarian, Molly Hazelton. She has done the lion's share of the reading, but I've done one, our guidance counselors, a couple of our teachers, and throughout the year it'll be, lots of different guest readers. So if any of you would like to read a story, come in. Molly will tape it for you, and you can be a YouTube star too. We don't have a big following yet, but I'm sure that we will. But we do have a couple kids who watch every single week, and they come in the next day and they talk about it, which is kind of cool. And then lastly, we are on day 3 of our November Gratitude Challenge. So at the beginning of every morning, we share the challenge of the day. I posted on Facebook and Instagram. Kids try to meet that challenge during the day. The first 2 was to thank someone in your school and someone in your classroom. Today was to think about something you're proud of and kind of pat yourself on the back for that, right? For being grateful for things that are good in your own life. So we get a lot of really cool connections to different classrooms. Sometimes they're used as writing prompts. Sometimes you just get a really nice email or letter in your mailbox, and then that kind of feels good for the day. And sometimes, parents will post on our page things that happened at home. And as we go through the month, some of them are more suited to home than they are to school. So it shows. And I think that that's it. Thank you.
That's awesome, Christy. I had not heard about your tucked in Tuesday. I think that is a genius idea. And so they can go back in and reread, right? They're posted
Yeah.
on YouTube.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Christy. That's fabulous. I loved the whole spectrum there. Really excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, Morgan, you're up with our financial and business report.
Okay, thanks. I sent out the October financial report by email yesterday. I'm happy to try to answer any questions on it. I'm not planning on spending any time going over that tonight. The big question that's still out there is around tuition payments from several schools. And so really until those come in, we won't look at this year's budget and try to anticipate where you might be ending the fiscal year. And then in terms of tuition students, I did send out a little update in your packet. We budgeted based on 268 students. We've been billed for 162 so far. We've not seen bills from Maple Run and North Country, which are the two others that are fairly good sized, as well as we haven't seen bills from several private schools yet. And, you know, in the past, across those private schools, we might pick up another dozen or two kids. So my gut tells me that we're going to be coming in below budget on tuition kids, but it's a little bit early to tell. And we should at least have Maple Run and North Country by our next board meeting. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions on either of those.
Morgan, can you remind me if we do come in under budget on our high school tuition kids, that where does that surplus go in the for the next fiscal year? Or does it draw down other expenses or areas where we may have gone over in the current year's budget?
So the answer is both. When we get to June 30th, whatever money is left over in the budget will be applied to your FY24 budget unless the voters give you permission to do otherwise. And so when we have a big surplus at the end of the year, that's when we look to taking some of that money and putting it into a capital improvement fund to pay for some of those bigger building needs down the road. Certainly coming in under on tuition payments is a big driver for that. What we'll do is once we know that, you as the board and working with your principals can kind of decide how confident you are that that's going to last. Do you want to move ahead on some of those capital projects out of this year's budget and get them done? If we could hire teachers, you could go out and hire more teachers with that. Really, you have the flexibility to spend up to that bottom line that you have approved from the voters.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So I also sent out by email today the first look at your FY23 expense budget. And just very quickly, I'll go through the important dates. We will go over that tonight and I can answer any questions you have. My hope is that you just have a familiarity of what the different sections of the budget are, because there are still a lot of moving parts. And then when we meet again in December, we can start having some of the harder questions around staffing levels and what other things you want to put in or take out of the budget. There are four factors that go into the tax rate, and this is, I'm sure, new for Arlene and probably sounds new to several of the folks because it is pretty arcane. But the four levers on the tax rate are your budget, the yield proposal, equalized pupil numbers, and your CLA. The yield, the tax commissioner will put out a proposed yield on December 1st. which I will try to pull into your budget on that December 1st meeting. Your equalized pupils, we will probably not get until about 2 weeks after that. And then the CLA figures come in at the end of December. So, in December, we will be able to start honing down how much money you're going to spend, but we really won't be able to look at that in terms of what the impact on the tax rate will be. I will tell you that we've got a big surplus going into FY23. So in December and maybe January, we are going to be having the conversation of should we put X dollars into a capital reserve fund this year, or ask for permission from the voters. And the amount that you do propose for that will impact the tax rate that we go to voters with. My hope is that we will finalize a budget at your January 5th meeting. That is maybe optimistic. It really would require the supervisory union finalizing their budget by that time, and the Enosburg-Richford board finalizing their budget by that time. I don't anticipate Enosburg-Richford's going to finalize until the week following, and that will be when they set a projection for your tuition rates for most of your high school kids. We go to budget not knowing how many kids are going to come or what schools they're going to go to, and we'll have a pretty good idea of where Enosburg-Richford's tuition rate will come in. So we could go to press on January 5th if we want. And what I think we've done in years past is sort of passed a budget provisionally and then kept the option open if something big moved at the Enosburg-Richford January meeting or the FNESU January meeting, that we would call a quick meeting of this board and rewarn the budget if we needed to make some changes.
Great. And Morgan, I have just a quick question still around the high schoolers. Have you done calculations yet of how many outgoing graduating 12th graders seniors will have, and how many incoming graduating 8th graders will have?
So I have not looked at seniors yet because we don't have all the tuition bills in yet.
Yeah.
But I will tip this in the enrollment discussion as well. You are looking at an uncharacteristically small 8th grade class that's graduating, which is happy days for this board, and it's sad for the other board in our SU, because it's likely that you're going to have a bump this year of a drop of tuition kids. Looking out the 7th, 6th, 5th graders going through NMV, they all seem to be regressing back to the mean, and at least at this point look like they're going to be fairly stable.
Great. Thanks, Morgan.
Sure. So I am going to share my screen for the benefit of the folks who didn't get this by email. But you should be seeing now the expenditure annual budget report that I sent out to you by email. And I'm going to walk through it pretty quickly. I'm happy to stop and try to answer any questions, but I'm going to just walk through the format, and then I will kind of point out building by building where I'm seeing some potential big moves, and then we'll get into the details at your December meeting. So similar to your financial reports, across the top to the left, this is how we kind of slice and dice the budget. So I'm just giving you the general fund. It is next split out by location. So you have your 4 elementary schools and then your district-wide section. The level for this side is split between pre-K and then everything else. And then the program and the function is how we divide up the budget into the different categories that you're used to seeing on those monthly financial reports. On your detailed budget report, you're going to see a lot of line item detail that you don't see in the normal monthly report. So first are going to be your salaries. You go through teachers, paras, substitutes. Later on, there'll be administrators, other flavors of support staff. But those first sections, all the ones that start with 5.1, are all basically salaries. And so when we have the conversation about somebody wants to add a teacher to their building, or they're going to cut a person here, those discussions really are going to be what drives these numbers, not you guys going in and saying, I want to, cut salaries by $5,000. The numbers that start with 5.2 are benefits, and so they are tied to the people who are generating these salaries. So they'll move a lot as we get tips from VHI about where health rates might end up, or information from VSBID on where some of those other insurances are going to end up. But for the most part, these numbers as well are going to move based on what you tell us and tell your building leaders are appropriate levels of staffing for the building. And then anything else will be in the categories loosely described as services or stuff. So to the extent we're hiring NCSS workers, or we're paying bonds off the building, or we're buying supplies for the school, or we're paying utilities, they will come in that next section of account codes. So again, we're looking at Bakersfield first. We start with pre-K, and then this first section is direct instruction. So that's what your teacher and your paraeducator is costing you, and then any supplies that we spend for that program. The next section is direct instruction for your K through 12 kids. So this will be primarily the salaries of your teachers and paras and their benefits. And then we start getting into some of these contracted services. You'll see down at the bottom of that page. And then things like your supplies. Tuition to private schools here is for K-8 students who are not educated in your buildings, but who do not qualify for special ed. Following that, the guidance department, generally this is going to be salaries and benefits. Your health services comes next. That's generally salary for your nurse and some supplies. Instructional staff training is the professional development for teachers and paraeducators. Library media services, generally just your library and their benefits, and then some money for books and periodicals. Technology is where we will put the salaries for your tech person, and then also you will see supplies down here, and this is generally where we're budgeting for things like replacing the Chromebooks for the graduating class, and you're backfilling for the third graders or fourth graders or whatever grade gets their Chromebooks as they move up. Office of the principal comes next. That's fairly self-explanatory. We do have some dues and fees and postage and some expenses there that you don't see throughout the rest of the budget. Your plant section comes after principal. This is salaries for your custodians, and then we will tuck some money in to for repair and maintenance for each of your buildings. We'll be talking about the district-wide facilities manager position later on in the meeting. My hope is that we'll have somebody on board in time for them to at least get a quick run through your schools and then give me a reality check on these numbers, because really they tend to just follow from one year to the next unless we know that there's a big expense coming up and we don't have the capital funds to cover it elsewhere. Following that, there's a couple little sections, transportation costs for field trips, which was pretty 2019, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to be doing that again. in the near future, co-curricular transportation, your debt service, which each of your schools will have a section for that now. Special education is the cost of your special ed paras. Everything else is coming through as an assessment from the supervisory union. This with Act 173 may be changing pretty dramatically. We don't really have the details on that, and it would be optimistic for me to say we're going to have the details by the time we warn budgets, but we're hopeful to at least have an indication of how that may look different. Finally, for the school, you'll come to your athletics, which again has been hard to budget given the last couple years of not really having a strong track record. Berkshire follows. Those categories are going to be the same for Berkshire, for Montgomery, and for Sheldon. Maybe a little variation from one to the next. And then that'll get us down to your district level. So a lot of big ticket items in here, and most of these are made up numbers at this point. We have pre-K tuition. So this is what you're spending to send your pre-K kids to private placements through Act 166. We've seen this number go up every year as more families are accessing that. Melissa, who I think is going to talk about pre-K later on tonight, and I will come up with a best guess. We kind of look at past history and then try to make some predictions based on what we're hearing in terms of programs opening or programs adding licensed teachers, which will make them eligible to receive Act 166 payments. Under that is your high school tuition. This number is a pure guess at this point. Once I get to those last few private schools and Maple Run and North Country bills in there, I will look and make some predictions, assume that we're going to keep all the 9th graders going to 10th grade, assume some of the 10th graders going into 11th may access the tech center, and you pay for them in a different way. And then we assume some of the 11th graders are going to go on to dual enrollment, and you don't pay for them and you don't count them once they hit that level. And then we'll make some guesses on where your 8th graders are going to go. And we've, at this point, we've really just looked at historical numbers and say, okay, we know that X% are going to Enosburg, Richford, X% are going to Maple Run, and the rest are going to be scattered about to different private schools. Generally, it doesn't matter where we guess they go. The impact for you is if you have a Montgomery student, let's say, who has a parent in Enosburg and a parent in Montgomery, you haven't had to care for about that. But if they then go to Enosburg High School or they go to Richford High School, you don't have to pay tuition for them because they have a parent in that district. And that's kind of where the real guesswork comes in for high school kids. Following those tuition payments, we have some board expenses. So a little bit of professional development for you all. We've got your insurances coming here. You've got some supplies for things like teacher appreciation and some dues and fees, which cover the entire district. Advertising for job postings, things like that. Get into your legal budget, and then the SU assessment. At this point, it's a guess. I think after the SU meeting later on this month, we can kind of make some predictions on where it's going to go, both for that and for your transportation, which is coming in at the bottom of page 22, top of page 23, or sorry, just bottom of page 22. This other after school is your contribution to the 21C program. I'm sure Heather will be coming to a meeting soon about that ask. Right now, I've just brought over the number that you're paying this year. And then finally, the special ed assessment. And this is one that's potentially changing pretty dramatically with Act 173. So that was sort of the speed run through. Are there any questions first on the format of that? Tried to mirror, it's a lot more detail than you see in your monthly reports, but we've basically tried to mirror the overall format of it. Okay, and then what I'll do is obviously tuition kids, your SU assessments are the big moving pieces right now that could have a pretty large impact on the bottom line. In terms of staffing, what I know now after a first run through with the principals is that budget to budget, I'm not anticipating any increases in Bakersfield. They currently have an opening for a teacher position and an opening for a para position that they haven't filled, and I believe those will be staying in the budget. Similar for Berkshire, I don't think we're at this point contemplating any new staff. In Berkshire, we have had that ongoing conversation about that one class that's sort of at the tipping point in terms of needing to be broken into two. So that may change between now and December. And then there's an additional position that I know Lenny is contemplating, which may be grant fundable, but we may need to move a portion of that into the local budget if it's something that the board supports. In terms of Montgomery, there is a desire by Sandy to increase the guidance position from 0.5 to 1.0. So I will come up with a dollar amount for that and then include that in there. You're going to see a lot of movement between lines that are listed as salaries and lines that are listed as billbacks from the SU, and that's because currently Sandy is sharing 2 staff members with Richford, and because Richford's in a different district, those 2 staff members are hired by the SU and then paid by the SU, and then we just send you a bill for your share of them. That's a little bit different than what we're doing between Montgomery and Berkshire, where they have a shared staff member, but because it's the same employer, we can just include that directly in your budget. In terms of Sheldon, at this point, I'm not contemplating adding any staff, but there are two potential teacher positions on the horizon that I think Melissa and maybe Christy are going to talk about later on in the meeting. And then one possible additional paraeducator who would be replacing an NCSS staff worker. So again, a movement in your budget, but doesn't necessarily change the number of humans in your building. And if I missed anybody in that run through, I take full ownership of that, and I'm sure your principals told me, and I just haven't gone back to those notes yet. And then district-wide, you do have in your budget this year that facilities manager position as an NMV position, and that's something that will be coming out of your budget and will be going into the SU budget as we've changed that to be an SU-wide person. So another quick run through, any initial questions on that? And I'm certainly happy to take any offline if folks want to. Okay.
Thanks, Morgan. Appreciate it.
Yep. And then so one more recap on that, and then I'll move to enrollment. In terms of people you're negotiating with, you have 2 principals who are not under contract. So I'm just going to be making guesses as to their salaries, and those are only my guesses. I'm not asking them for input. I'm just putting in money so that you have some in the budget. You are negotiating with your teachers, so I've put in an increase there. I don't know if that's going to be enough to cover it. We will probably not have any substantive meetings with the union before we are finalizing these budgets. So I think if anyone on the negotiating committee is contemplating either going in with a pay cut and sitting hard on a pay freeze, or planning on going in by giving away the farm, either of those extremes would be helpful to know. Otherwise, I'll have enough money in there for that pretty narrow range that we tend to settle in terms of new money. I think you all got an email from VHI around their projected healthcare premium increases. They're a little more palatable than they've been in years past, which is good news. It's still an increase, and it there was a time when those increases would hurt, but now anything that's not double digits gives us a big sigh of relief. So I will model those in there. Because of how the statewide negotiations ended, we have a fair number of people who have moved from an HSA which is a health savings account, to an HRA, which is a health reimbursement account. The broad brush difference is an HSA is at the beginning of the year, we say, here's some money for you to manage and you to have, and you can spend it on healthcare if you want. An HRA is, we promise to pay up to X number of dollars of your healthcare costs. You submit us receipts and we'll pay those bills. So for an HRA, we really have no idea person to person how much money that's going to cost you in a given year. We don't have a track record on how to predict it, and there's enough movement of teachers and plans that I don't feel confident in doing that. So what I will be doing is guessing high. In talking with Jamie, we've sort of got two categories of people who are on HRAs, and this is speaking very generally. We have folks who have been in Sheldon for a while where they didn't have an HSA and they were just used to that vehicle and so have stayed with it. And then we have a number of people who are able to do the math and are looking at whatever they have coming down the pike next year and figuring that they're going to be spending all of that money. And so it's better for them to be in a plan with an HRA and a lower premium cost to them. So I'm going to assume that most, if not all of those, are going to get spent. And if they don't, then that's money we can either give back to the taxpayers or put into a capital reserve fund in 2024.
Okay. That's it, Morgan? I mean, not that's it, but that's
it.
all for tonight.
Hopefully that was dense enough to forestall any questions.
All right. Well, it's good to start wrapping our heads around it, especially as we head into negotiations and such. I appreciate the breakdown. Thank you.
Sure thing. And then my last piece is on enrollment, and this is going to be a recap for the SU folks, but I realize not everybody was in on that meeting. So this is a graph of enrollment from 2017 to 2021 is actual data, and then 22 to 26 is my projection. I don't put a lot of faith in the projection, but basically what I'm doing is I'm looking at a cohort of kids and then looking at where that class was 3 years ago for each grade for each year, and saying, okay, if we went from 10 kids to 11 kids over those 3 years, I'm going to assume that that's a 10% increase over the next 3 years. You will see from 2017 to 2020 that for most of these schools, there was kind of a steady decline, not really dramatic. I'm sorry, 2007 to 2019, which is kind of consistent with what we've been seeing in the state. We know that Chittenden County and Franklin County are not seeing the dramatic drops that the rest of the state are seeing, but we're seeing that fluctuation. 2020 was COVID year, so we saw for the most part across the SU some pretty big drops that year. And then again in 2021, you'll see Montgomery is this blue section. They've rebounded basically to the same level. Sheldon has rebounded up top in the red to higher than they've been in a long time. So it's COVID making it hard to predict out those long-term trends, but we definitely have seen that bounce back, and we're hopeful that as we get back to some semblance of normalcy, those numbers will drift back up. These numbers are by grade for NMV as a whole. The numbers are in yellow here are just warnings to me not to use them because we didn't have this breakdown for Sheldon at that point. 2016 was the first year we got detailed numbers for Sheldon. So again, you can see for these totals that they're kind of drifting down to 2019, a big drop for 2020, and then pop back up for 2021. And then 2021, you'll see here, this 8th grade class is class of 65. So those are the kids you're paying tuition on next year and the next 4 years. That 2020 class, even in a small year, was 84. So that's a pretty huge decrease. And then it's going to pop back up in your 2024 budget when those 7th graders go to high school. And then those numbers stay pretty consistent deep into 1st grade again. So that's really the only trend I wanted to point out for enrollment, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions on that as well.
Hey, Morgan, I have a question. So the pre-K place, I mean, we've got the pre-K and then the play school numbers. Do you have those for breakdown between all the different schools?
I do. It's a hard one to look at, but for Bakersfield, it's this 5 and 8. And again, this the pre-K numbers are pretty fluid because they're taken on October 1st. There are kids who haven't qualified yet. And then in COVID year 2020, there were a lot of programs that just didn't have the space because of the distancing to operate the way we do now. But Berkshire on October 1st had a total of 13. Bakersfield, a total of 17. Skipping down to Montgomery, we had 20 between the two. And then Sheldon, bigger numbers there, 35. The other challenge around pre-K, and Melissa or your building principals could talk to this, is that, I'm looking at the number of kids we count, and we count them after 10 hours. Some of those kids may be there for more than 10 hours, and so it doesn't necessarily give you a fair indication of what kind of staffing you need in those programs. But these are the ones that we're counting for state purposes.
And do we offer play or preschool vouchers if someone wants to access those beyond the hours that are available in any of the given schools?
So we offer vouchers for the first 10 hours of pre-K education if there's a licensed teacher. So if someone's taking 10 hours at our pre-K program, we will not then turn around and also pay for them to get 10 hours at a private provider.
Okay.
We're going to talk a little more about pre-K in my section. Melissa's with us today, so she can answer some of those more in-depth questions too.
Okay. All right. I have another question, but then I'll hold it then for Melissa.
Any other questions on enrollment? Alrighty, well, unless there are questions on anything else, that is all I have for you tonight.
Thanks, Morgan. Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
So Lynn, you're up now.
Okay. So I'll start with personnel. My report is relatively short this month because I knew this was going to be a little longer of a month for Morgan's report. So under personnel, we really saw the hiring and resignations and things stabilize a little bit. We have 2 resignations, just informational for you. Christy, okay if I share those? So you have Connor Hoban, who's a paraeducator, and Rodney Whiting, who's a custodian. Just informational. They have both resigned, so Christy will be looking to fill 2 positions in Sheldon. We do not have any other hiring or resignations or retirements that came in since the last time we met. We do still have some openings. So Bakersfield is still looking for a paraeducator. Berkshire is looking for a half-time academic coach and a paraeducator. Sheldon is looking for a paraeducator, and as an NMV district, we're still looking for a school nurse. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the nurse in a bit. So if there are no questions on personnel, I'm going to shift to some COVID-related topics.
Lynn, I just have one quick question. Is there not still a planning room position open at Berkshire, or did that get filled? Or I may be misremembering that planning room position.
I have a great memory. Lenny, do you want to take that one?
That that paraeducator position that is opened is the planning room position.
Okay.
The
Okay.
planning room coordinator is a paraeducator position, so the
Sure.
2 titles are the same in that context.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarifying. Thank you.
So you should have all received a pretty substantial community update earlier today. There's a lot of information that had to get out to our families, and I'm just going to talk high level about several of them. The first I'm going to talk about is student vaccination clinics. So we have the vaccination for 5 to 11-year-olds was approved. So vaccination clinics will be beginning next week. We do have 4 sites in FNESU that VDH will be using for vaccination clinics. These are completely voluntary. Parents need to enroll their children in the vaccination clinics, and for our FNESU clinics, they need to attend with their children. So we're holding clinics in Enosburg, Richford, Berkshire, and Sheldon at the elementary schools. So that is pretty much the update. I've released all the families how to register for the clinics, and they'll be able to register for follow-ups at the clinics when they're there with their children. One of the things I just want to say is a lot of the things that we're having to do because of COVID seem to be divisive, and vaccination is certainly one of them. And I'm hoping as a community we can get to a place where we can decide that people have different points of view and that we can be respectful of the other points of view. So I'm hoping that, whether people are for or against vaccination, that they'll be respectful to one another about a parent's right to choose whether or not to vaccinate their children. So just wanted to mention that. There are also some recent changes to our contact tracing guidelines. So there have really been a lot of things that have been in the nursing world recently, and this is one of them, nursing and administration. Some of the changes that came out the 3rd week in October had to do with changes to bus contact tracing. They did a lot of they looked at a lot of the transmission data from school buses and decided that it wasn't necessary to quarantine students as deeply as what we had been instructed previously to do. So the bus contact tracing has shifted from, several seats around the COVID positive individual to the seatmate that's identified, as long as the other bus protocols are in place, like the requirement that everyone is masked and that the windows, at least 4 windows, remain open, and those are all federal standards. So that's one change. The other change around contact tracing is we no longer have to contact trace when things are happening outside. So if there's a COVID positive individual on the playground, you do not need to contact trace for that. There's also a shift with the 15-minute rule. So previously, we had to identify someone as a close contact if they were within 6 feet of a COVID positive individual for 15 cumulative minutes over a 24-hour period. So that has shifted to 3 feet instead of 6 feet. So those are the changes that have to do with the contact tracing. Probably the biggest news that we have that was released today is we're really close to being able to roll out some of the new testing programs. We have right now we have kind of a significant number of people that have been identified as close contacts. At one point last week, we had over 100. I think we were at around 120 people who were having to quarantine, and we've had a fair number of positive cases, so that pressure really isn't coming off right now. So as of today, late this afternoon, we had our 96th case. So we're approaching where we were at the end of last year mark. So I was thinking we might hit that by Thanksgiving, and we're going to probably hit it tomorrow or Friday. So we've had 11 cases so far this week, 96 total. So our nurses are making this an urgent priority to try to get these response testing programs up and running. So the program that we're trying to get on board the quickest is the Test to Stay program. So what that program does is if an individual, a student or an adult is identified, an unvaccinated individual is identified as a close contact to a positive individual, they would no longer need to not come to school. They'd still be identified as a close contact, and they would have the opportunity to participate in the Test to Stay program. So that essentially would be, for example, if my child is a close contact, they would have to do the Test to Stay program for 7 days. So they would go to a site and they would have a rapid antigen test. It is a small nasal swab, and it would be read within 15 minutes. If they were negative, they could go to school. They'd still be asked to quarantine outside of school. They could still participate in, if there was an athletic practice or there was a drama production or something like that, they would still be allowed to participate. They would not be allowed to participate in any activity that involved another school. So if they were on a basketball team and they were a close contact in the Test to Stay program, they could go to all the practices, but if there was a game, they would not be able to attend the game. So this would allow us to have an opportunity to keep more students in school that are identified as close contacts. If there's a negative or if there's a positive to a rapid antigen test, then they wouldn't be able to come to school. So we would have to go down another track. And in that communication, there's a flow chart that parents can pretty easily follow to see, what happens if a test is positive or negative and what are the next steps. So there's also, once we get that up and running, there's also a response testing program that we'll be able to have in place. We're still waiting on materials for that program. So if someone presents as symptomatic during the day, we can actually do a PCR test before they go home. So again, this is something that in our community, there are people that feel strongly about testing or not testing. This is a program that is completely voluntary. We are not testing anyone's children unless they sign up for these programs. So today in the communication, there were 2 pieces for parents to complete. One was a consent to participate, and the second was a registration to participate in the Test to Stay programs. So they're again, it's completely parental choice. So we will be in a place where hopefully soon we'll be quarantining far less students, and we'll be able to have more students in school each day. It has been challenging. I understand where some of the frustration and the anxiety is coming from. There have been some students in classes that have had to go into quarantine multiple times since the start of the school year. And, I can imagine as a family that is not only challenging emotionally, it's also challenging financially as well. So I do understand where some of this is coming from, but we're pleased to be able to bring those on board. We originally were hoping that we could get 6 sites up and running to be able to do test to stay. Now that other people around us have begun their test to stay programs, it's a little more evident that the human resources needed to be able to, these will be drive up testing sites. The human resources that are going to be needed to do one site is going to be a lot more significant than what we had originally hoped. So our goal right now is to try to onboard 2 sites in this next, I'm hopeful within this next week, and have those up and running and as an option for people to utilize to keep kiddos in school. Are there any questions about any of the COVID-related topics that I just shared? Okay. So
Sorry, Lynn, I have a quick question. Can the sites, the drive-through sites, you don't yet know, I just wanted to clarify, you don't yet know which sites will be open throughout the SU?
we
Where we'll host?
we have an idea of where we would like to use, but we don't yet have permission. So we're trying to brainstorm how can we center some of these sites, and we're exploring right now both Enosburg and Richford as sites that border all of our other towns. So they're as central as we could get. We just have to finalize some of the logistics, Mary, before I really want to say much more than that. But our intention is to try to get them in those central locations. And we have been for a few weeks asking staff members, are you willing to come in early and help us with this response testing? And I have been so appreciative of how many people have stepped up and said, I'll do it, I'll help. Whatever we can do to help our students. It's not surprising to me because we just have phenomenal staff members, but we'll be deploying those teams to go out and now operationalize the plans that we've been working towards. So there were several pieces in planning this that were a little complex. We did receive our first batch of the rapid antigen tests yesterday, I believe. We're waiting for a shipment of PCR tests, should be here tomorrow. We had to figure out, we had to pursue a contract for medical waste, that's one of the final pieces that we're waiting on. And we had to get what's called a Clia Waiver. So it is, I think we're pretty set. I think we've jumped through most of the hoops that were in place, and we got some help from the Agency of Education to be able to get this up and rolling. So we appreciate that support. It's not something we've ever had to do, so it's a different kind of work this year, I will say.
And Lynn, as far as funding goes for this, is a lot of this coming from ESSER funds or state and federal? Because certainly no district had all these kind of costs embedded in the current budget.
Some of these are embedded in the state's ESSER funding plan, so there's no charge for the PCR tests or any of the rapid antigen tests or any of those. We will have some expenses. We'll have PPE expenses, and we'll also have some employee expenses. Some of the people who will be doing it are already salaried employees, so there won't be additional expenses for them. But others that are hourly employees are working outside of, their job category, we will certainly have some additional expenses there. And our intention is to use some of the ESSER money to be able to do that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lynn, I had a quick question around transportation, and if there's any, I don't want to call it pushback. That's not what I'm thinking. My mind isn't working properly tonight. If there's any hardship for families in having to transport their children to testing sites in order to have them to stay at school, and also the time that it takes the parent to bring their child in, have them tested, wait for them to be tested, and wait to know whether they can be in school that day, and then have to make alternative arrangements if they can't be in school. I mean, ideally, people would have a backup plan, but in reality, that usually doesn't happen for folks.
Mhm. That's tricky. We don't have backup plans that we can offer to people because we're struggling with our own staffing levels. So I'm hoping, as frustrating as this will feel when families do, they're hoping for a negative, but they get a positive. We're hoping that people can keep in mind that this is the whole goal of this is to be able to create a path for your child not to have to quarantine for that 7-day period. So, we'll do our best if there's an extreme circumstance, like someone they actually do not have any transportation. We'll try to, put our heads together and figure out through our new family engagement specialist team, like how could we provide resources for those families. But we are not going to be able to navigate special requests for times or leaving children or anything like that. It's not going to be feasible. And again, we've tried to we've been working with a community partner with Cold Hollow Family Practice has opened up, because we haven't had a lot of local testing. Notch has opened up some testing, and Cold Hollow has opened up to testing for people who are not patients for them, which has been great. But what we are finding, and what I'm hearing from not just our staff members, from some of our community partners as well, is that although many people are very appreciative, others have very short fuses right now, and they're really lashing out when things aren't going well. And I'm trying to set reasonable expectations. I don't want to say something that we can't follow through with, because I just don't think we have the capacity to navigate all of those individual challenges, like if it's going to make someone late for work or anything like that. So we're going to do our best.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I was not in any way suggesting that the supervisory union or the district boards or anyone needs to be responsible for that. I just wondered how the AOE thought about what they thought about these possible scenarios that transportation in rural areas is going to be a hardship for families. Of course, everybody wants their kids to be in school, but are people really going to make that effort to participate in the test to stay if it means they can't get to work on time, or they have no alternative, if their child can't attend school anyway, are they just going to keep their children home? I'm thinking of many different scenarios. So I know you don't have the answers, but
I think that'll happen some. I think from speaking with some colleagues who already have this up and running, they're definitely not getting 100% of the kids who are eligible to participating. And I understand logistically it might not work for some families, but I think there'll be other families that are going to be very relieved to have this option. Lisa, I took your question as an opportunity to say something that was on my mind, just about setting those reasonable expectations for what we're able to do, and understanding that it probably won't feel like enough to some people, and just kind of acknowledging you might be experiencing those frustrations. Like, let's work together in as positive a way as we can. That would be helpful.
well, I appreciate that you will try to work with everybody in whatever scenario they're experiencing. I just, it's frustrating all around. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on any of that? Okay, I want to talk a little bit about equity. There are action items under this section of my report. The first is about preschool, and I've asked Melissa to join us today. Melissa did her board report. Melissa is sorry, I should introduce you, Melissa. Melissa is our new early childhood program director. And we're thrilled to have her in the short amount of time. She has already done some really fabulous things in pre-K, and she did a really great presentation about preschool programs at our FNESU board meeting. And one of the things that stood out in the board meeting that definitely came up, and there were people that asked questions about it, was about how equitable is it in terms of what we're able to offer to our preschool children. So I know you had some data, Melissa. I don't know if you want to talk through any of that data or share any of the slides with this board, but one of the things that really did stand out is that in NMV, we do have some discrepancy in what we're offering to our preschool children.
Hold on 1 second. I have a little sidekick here.
It's all right. We love sidekicks.
He's adorable, biased opinion. So some of the information that I shared, I think I'll just talk about it at this point. Pull up my handouts. Is that the majority of our programs have between 12 to 15 hours per week. Generally for 3-year-olds, it kind of caps at that 10 hours per Act 166. And then our 4-year-old programs are anywhere between 12 hours and 29 hours, and that's throughout the SU. And one thing that did stand out was the Sheldon 3-year-old session, which currently only offers a 3-hour slot, which means that we don't receive any money per se for those children. And if they attend another child care center that is Act 166 pre-qualified and is 10 hours or more, we are then paying out for those children as well. And so that's pretty much where we're at. Everybody else, we are okay with billing. And we have had inquiries for 3-year-olds around the program, and they're just the general consensus from inquiries coming in is that there aren't enough hours being offered for the majority of families to make that work. So what we'll see is specifically kids with additional needs having to pop in for services, but then they attend care elsewhere. Or at times we've been looking at other schools who do have 3-year-old programs that have more hours that can accommodate that. Which then we potentially run into the concern of inundating certain schools with kids with needs versus others. So that's just something that we noticed. And Christy and I have not had an opportunity to really coordinate and talk about this, just so we do know that.
So one of the pieces that really stood out, I just want to say, and I should have started with this. This is no fault of Sheldon. This is that Sheldon has had one pre-K teacher, and Sheldon has been growing. Morgan just showed you some data about enrollment for Sheldon, and they're one of our bigger elementary schools. And when we compare the staffing levels, not so much in NMV, but I think Sheldon size-wise is closer, more similar to Enosburg and Richford. In most cases, there are 2 teachers at each grade level in each of those schools. And that is true for most grades in Sheldon. It's not true for pre-K. So we have one teacher who's trying to provide these pre-K programs for the 3 and the 4-year-olds. So this is a conversation that we wanted to bring to this board to talk through is that where we want to be with pre-K, or do we want to problem solve? Is there another solution? And I know Christy and I have talked about this in the past. When you try to solve one problem, sometimes there are other problems that pop up too, and that raises some decisions around how we're utilizing space. Those things are going to come up as well. So it's a conversation. Doesn't have to be tonight, but it's something we wanted to make sure that the NMB board was aware of, because it certainly was a priority of the merger for us to continue to look at equitable opportunities for our students across, not always equal, but equitable opportunities across the NMB district.
So Lynn, can you clarify for me, or Melissa, or Sheldon right now for the 3-year-olds only offers 3 hours a week? Is that the same for the 4-year-olds? How many hours per week are offered for 4-year-olds for preschool versus play school?
So the 4-year-old class, let me pull up my, so there are 2 sessions for 4-year-olds, an AM session and an afternoon session, and they each session gets 12 hours per week. So 4-day, 3-hour sessions.
And so I'm not sure I understand. So is the issue a staffing issue, a space issue? Because the play school, and correct me if I'm using kind of outdated language. I know when my kids were a lot younger, it was play school for the 3-year-olds, preschool for the 4-year-olds, but I don't know if that kind of linguistically is different now as far as how you refer to it. But I'll go ahead with play school, and I'm referring to 3-year-olds. Is it that if you have a teacher, you have an early ed teacher at Sheldon, so why then are we only offering 3 hours? If we have, we have at least one early ed teacher currently doing the 4-year-old program, the split day 4-year-old program, and the existing 3 hours that we are giving to play school. Is that that's one teacher who does all of that? And why are we not able to provide more hours? Because we have a staff person who obviously isn't being maxed out with 3 hours of play school. And how many kids are in that play school class?
Well, I'll take the first part, and then I'm gonna push to Christy too. So this is one teacher doing all of that, though, Mary. One pre-K teacher who is responsible for the 3-year-old program and the 4-year-old programs. So it's not 2 teachers right now. So I think mathematically, because there are 2 sessions of 4-year-old, and Christy, feel free to jump in here. That's one of the challenges. And the other answer is, the other challenge is space. It is the 2-pronged challenge. So what do you want to add, Christy?
I think the only thing that I would add is that we can't fit all the 3-year-olds into the other program. So we have a lot of 4-year-olds. So we have 2 sessions, and we wouldn't be able to put all 12 3-year-olds into those 4-year-old sessions, even if we wanted to. But we've maxed out the number of kids we can have in any session. Does that make sense?
With one teacher and one classroom, we are maxed out between 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds number wise, and with licensing. We wouldn't be able to fit the 3-year-olds, especially if we offered more hours. I think we'd find more interest, and numbers would go up, and there's not capacity for that within the classroom.
From a community perspective, I get a lot of questions around, why can't we do more? I'd rather send my child to Sheldon than drive to St. Albans every day. There's a lot of the private entities that parents are engaging with to send their 3 and 4-year-olds to, when I think they would opt for a Sheldon opportunity.
So the challenge is, if the board is supportive of the notion of looking at pre-K and saying we want more, so we want to staff more, the challenge would be to say to Christy, okay, now can we, if we're going to put this in the budget, can you go back and do some exploration of creative uses of, are there other spaces that we could utilize to be able to accomplish this. I'm watching Emily's eyes going, whoa, yeah, how are we going to do that?
I just have a million things in my head. Does it have to be at the Sheldon Elementary School?
So I think that there are some options that maybe weren't as obvious as before these conversations started at the Sheldon Elementary School. Certainly my preference would be yes, because I think part of the, the idea of pre-K is prepping them to be, ready to enter kindergarten. We could potentially have it offsite. It would be a little more complicated because of the licensing piece. But I think that you could charge Christy with coming back with some of those ideas if before she does that. I think there just needs to be a conversation about what does the board want to do in terms of the staffing piece. Are we at a place where the board wants to commit and say, it's time that we add another pre-K teacher to make it more equitable to what we're offering in Enosburg and Richford in terms of, I know you had a chart, Melissa, just talking about the number of total students. And you could see in that chart, those numbers of 3 and 4 year olds for Sheldon were right up there with the programs in the other two larger communities.
Yeah, if you're comparing it to, say, Richford, there are 12 3-year-olds in Richford, there are 11 3-year-olds in Sheldon, and there are 22 4-year-olds in Richford and 24 4-year-olds in Sheldon.
And they have 2 teachers.
Yes, they have two classroom teachers, yes, and they run 2 different sessions of 3-year-olds.
What are
How
the
many
time
hours?
durations?
Sorry, how many hours does each child get?
In Richford?
Mm-hmm.
So in Richford, we are looking at, they're the, sorry here, Richford 4-year-olds get 29 hours and their 3-year-olds get 12 and a half. So the 3-year-olds attend for 2 full days, and the 4-year-olds attend for 4 full days and a half day, split between the 2 classrooms. The 3-year-olds are rolled into their 4-year-old classroom. So of the 15 students they have in a class, 12 of them are 4-year-olds and 3 of them are 3-year-olds. So it's a bit of a different model. And they are an outlier for hours on the other end, in regard to the 4-year-olds having that 29 hours.
If we were to mimic that, even talk about being able to mimic that, you would probably see a significant increase in your enrollment.
And
Oh.
remind me, there is no charge to parents for any additional hours over the 10 hours. Is that correct?
Correct. Private sites do tuition, but the schools do not.
So of course, there would be more interest in a program at the public school if there were space available. That goes without saying. I do know that having looked at this a lot outside of public school and at private schools, there are many, many different models out there. And I feel that we have to be really mindful about whether a 3-year-old is attending school all day for several days in a row. Is that a daycare program, or is it a preschool or play school, as Mary and I knew it with our children? So I think we have to be really careful about how we would work the hours for such a program.
Yes.
It needs to be beneficial educationally, because that's what we're doing. We're not really in the daycare business.
And when I say that other schools are offering full days, it does just mean that they are falling within school hours. Or for example, those who offer 2 5-day sessions, or sorry, 2 5-hour sessions, it would be 8:30 to 1:30. So it doesn't fall into that childcare realm. It's within the school hours. And generally, even if a school K through 12 or K through 8 offers before school care or after school care for that population, it is not extended to early ed, because there's a different regulations that fall under that. So it really, really falls within those hours.
Well, I certainly think it's imperative to take a closer look at this and see how we can bring Sheldon up closer to the offerings of the comparable schools. I mean, we don't really have a comparable school in NMV, so I'm thinking, we're kind of using Richford and Enosburg more for the metrics. And that makes sense to me. I'm not keen on the idea of an off-site location. I don't love that. I think that that the schools are uniquely set up to meet all of those kind of special kind of regulations that are required, not to mention the kindergarten readiness is a huge theme. So kids become so comfortable in the school from a young age. By the time they get to kindergarten, they may have already been there, as play schoolers and preschoolers. So I don't love that offsite. And I feel like we just did a huge renovation at that school. I'm hard pressed to believe there's not room in that school to accommodate increased hours that match what we're offering in our other schools across the SU. And 3 hours is just, it's not enough. And so it seems as though we have to look both at space utilization, but obviously another staff person to be able to offer a program that is equitable and comparable to similarly sized schools in the SU.
I want to jump in on 2 points here. One, I may be going out on a limb, but I have a feeling that the answer to Mary's first question maybe didn't really land with everyone. And so to the extent that that Christy and Melissa, you're bringing stuff back to this board, I'd encourage you to figure out a way maybe to graphically represent how many kids are served and what the hours are, and how often that's repeated, so that people can really see, okay, these kids that are getting 12 hours, it looks like 4 hours a day in the morning these 3 days, and then this is what's going on the other days, because I think it'll help them with getting to the comparables. And then the other point I wanted to put out there was that as the SU board knows, we've undertaken a contract with a group to really look at transportation of all our students across the SU. And one of the things specifically they're going to be looking at is transportation for early ed kiddos, and if that's feasible. And if they come back with something that is potentially workable for us, I think that's going to dramatically increase the interest in the programs if you're taking away the transportation barrier that some families have.
That would be huge. That'd be a big change. And I think that would be incredibly helpful for families to be able to more easily access the programs. The driving back and forth, especially, I mean, I know this from having done this with 3 children, when it's odd hours and it ends at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's not easy to work around especially for working families. That bus transportation would be great.
And in supervisory unions who do provide transportation, they also will go to partner sites, to childcare centers. So the child could attend a program at Sheldon and then be transported to a childcare center. The difference is we're not paying that childcare center because they're receiving our money, or they're receiving their 10 hours with the school. But the transportation makes a big difference.
I think it's a little tricky, and this will be part of the study, is we're geographically pretty spaced out. So the idea of transporting to a center after is going to be one that's going to be pretty complicated. Because we're not super centralized, but that's another conversation for another day. The one last point I just want to make about pre-K, and Emily, you pointed to this and saying, some families are choosing to take their voucher and do a program in a partner site. Every time someone chooses to do that, you're paying, I think, Melissa, is it $3,500, something like that?
A year.
So you're paying $3,500 a year for those kids to attend that partner site to get to that minimum 10 hours, right? And then they pay anything that's above that. But if you captured, even 10 kids coming back into Sheldon that are using vouchers now, and maybe 10's the wrong number, I'm not certain, but you can see that it financially would be beneficial for you as well. I think that the greatest benefit certainly would be in accessing those programs.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Are we looking to add to Sheldon so that they come up to the same hours that Richford is offering? Because that's a lot more than certainly if we're just adding to be comparable to some of the other schools in the area. It doesn't seem that it would be as big of a problem. I don't know. I mean, Richford 29 hours is a lot to add for those
That's for their
4-year-olds.
that's for their 4-year-olds. I think we're looking at the 3-year-olds, getting them to a minimum of 10 hours.
Right. So I'm not sure that we need a full person, another full staff member to make that much change, where Richford has 2 full staff people, but they've got quite a few more hours.
I think that you probably could land somewhere in the middle. Like when you look at the continuum, Arlene, of what programs across NMV and FNESU are offering, there is that wide spectrum of hours. And I think that part of it has to do with your school schedule and how you can shape those hours. So some of them do a multi-age, so they'll do 3 and 4-year-olds at the same time. Some are doing totally separate programs. So I think that, if we could look at it in terms of having another person, we also could address another issue of wait lists. So I think that you've got some kiddos, Chrissy, I think you're totally maxed at this point in your 4-year-old classroom, correct?
Yes.
Do you have a wait list currently?
Yes, we do.
So I think that if we had a full-time person, Arlene, we could chip away at that problem too.
Yeah. Good.
And can I just share, I'll share another example being from Enosburg. So they have 2 classrooms, higher numbers, and they run their 4-year-olds 8:30 to 1:30, 3 days a week. So they get 15 hours, and their 3-year-olds are 8:30 to 1:30, Tuesday and Thursday. So they get 10 hours. So that's a more common model that you'll see is the 3 days a week for 4-year-olds, 2 days a week for 3-year-olds. But it's still in that sense with roughly the same numbers, still 2 classrooms.
2 classrooms, 2 teachers, obviously. Yeah. Okay.
So my hearing that, as Morgan's building this budget, is the board in support of adding that in for this next go around, and then you can have another conversation about it in December.
I just have one quick question in regards to what Melissa just said. In Enosburg, it appears that there is a program 5 days a week, 8 to 1 or 8:30 to 1, and it involves 2 teachers. Why would that not involve 1 teacher?
Is that numbers?
Based on numbers. Yeah.
So 2 teachers need to be there every day, 5 days a week because of the enrollment numbers,
Yes.
even though the program is not running a full school day. So what do those teachers do in their other hours of the day, the 1:30 to 2:30 or 1 to 3, whatever time school adjourns that day?
So go ahead, Lynn.
So part of that is prep time, and there's also preschool teachers have some different expectations than classroom teachers do in terms of they have to have embedded time to be able to meet the health and safety regs. So they have to do some disinfecting and cleaning of materials that are definitely not things that anyone in a classroom has to do. So they do require some additional time. And I'm sure there's more embedded there that Melissa wants to add to.
Yeah, I was also going to say that during specials, during recess, during lunch, preschool teachers are always with their children. So their break opportunity would be at the end of the day or first thing in the morning. But some of that is in there. They also have their planning time. We do have our meeting. In addition, they have their school meeting. So we have an early ed meeting in addition to their school meeting. Um, and then there are some, as Lynn was saying, there are also some additional hours that they need to get for their BFIS professional development accounts to ensure that they are up to date.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question. It does seem as though moving forward with kind of looking at what the budget, budget tweaks would be to accommodate an added teacher in order to buttress the program and increase the enrollment. And I'm wondering, Christy, whether there's a way for you to put out I would just be curious to know parents of current 2-year-olds that will be 3 next year and 3 that will be 4 next year, who are maybe looking to find play and preschool opportunities, or currently using the voucher and sending them for their 10 hours to a private place. It'd be interesting to know how many would we be able to pull back in were we to expand the program at Sheldon.
I could guarantee at least 3 in just the 60 seconds I had to process your question. One is mine and a couple are relatives. Yeah, you get a lot.
I mean, I feel like we'd probably get a really enthusiastic response in general if we could bring the program up to be comparable with what our other district schools are offering. But that certainly kind of would then help know how we structure it, how many children we'd be kind of accommodating, and space and all of that. But I absolutely think it should be a priority to factor that in for the upcoming budget process.
Thank you. I totally agree with that. And just on the topic of space, I'd be really curious to kind of do a little space assessment, because yes, we do have this lovely new building that we are super fortunate and thankful for, but we did not add space. We just made our existing space way prettier. So I'd be curious to see where we're going to throw all these lovely 3 and 4-year-olds.
I had already shared with Lynn, because we talked about this, that I will do a space study, but we're using our conference room for a classroom. So
I think that Morgan is kind of an outside of the box creative thinker, and I know he's been also trying to help Chrissy to think about, the existing space. We can think about existing space as it stands today, and we can also think about existing space as, do we have the ability to think differently about space and about where existing, non-weight bearing walls are, and are there other ways that we could configure to be able to accomplish, if this is a priority, is there a way to get there? And I'm hopeful that we could come up with something.
he did give me one good idea.
Only one?
Well, we only had a few minutes.
Okay, well, he's got more in him, I'm confident.
Morgan would have come up with more, I'm sure.
Okay, the next piece, thank you for that conversation, by the way. The next piece that I want to just talk about is nursing. I had asked you back in, I'm not remembering if it was September or October, but I was asking you, can we increase nursing? Because we had made the decision to have a half-time nurse in Montgomery and in Bakersfield. And that felt like the right decision at the time. We all also expected to be in a very different place with the virus. And right now we have one nurse that's splitting time between Montgomery and Bakersfield, and those two communities have had a lot of positive cases. At one point, a couple of weeks ago, we counted the number of cases that one nurse had been responsible for, and it was over 25. So we're kind of in a place, you had approved us hiring an additional person. We went through a hiring process. We were not able to find LPNs, and we ended up interviewing an RN. And what we have found is, I think they interviewed a couple. There is interest in being a school nurse. What there's not interest in is someone leaving a field for a 1-year position. So we're struggling. We still do not have anybody filling that role. We had a person who was willing to be a substitute and help us out for the first several weeks of the school year. But right now we don't have that additional support. And I know I'm confident that I could speak for these 2 principals and for the existing school nurse that is desperately needed right now with all that we're trying to accomplish. So what I am wondering is, are we in a place where the board would consider hiring another school nurse in general for NMV schools? And if down the road we get to a place where we have, no COVID and we get back to a place where it feels more stable, talking about, maybe through attrition, if someone leaves within the supervisory union, how would it make sense to right size our nursing coverage? So I just wanted to put that on the table as a topic of conversation for this board. Are you willing to go at it a different route so we could get some viable candidates?
So can I clarify? You're asking the board if we are willing to take off the 1-year only advertisement piece.
Yes, and then I would take the existing nurse and I would put the existing nurse in one of the schools, and I would take the new hire and I would make them the nurse for the other school. So I'd be looking for an RN level person to work.
Well, it's interesting because it's somewhat kind of spurred by COVID, but if we remember back to the before times, it's hard to remember, we had this kind of this tension. Even then, we're looking at, even without the kind of added stressors of COVID, there was a feeling at the schools that only had the 0.5 that they were under, that they were at times, depending on the student population. I mean, it sometimes varies depending on the health needs of the current, student body. There were certainly times where the nurses felt, or in the building, we felt like there wasn't enough nursing coverage for those 0.5s. And that's without the added strain of COVID, which speaks to maybe it is warranted to, even if we find ourselves getting kind of emerging out of the kind of pressures that COVID places on our nursing staff, that it's not out of the realm to consider that the schools each need a full-time nurse. It was a long-winded way to say, I support it, because we've been having this conversation now for probably 4, if not 5 years at times, when we have felt as though we do not have the nursing capacity that each school needs in the district.
So for this one, I think I would be looking for the board to make a motion to give me the authority to move forward with advertising and hiring a full-time RN.
I will make that motion with the language removed about it being a 1-year only position.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa.
And would that be a year-to-year contract, Lynn?
I mean, all contracts really are year-to-year contracts, but we wouldn't be looking at this as something that, unless we made the decision to riff a position, the intention would be to move forward with the position.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So by roll, Erin,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Miranda,
Yes.
Arlene,
Yes.
And is Kat, you still with us?
He seems to have dropped off.
I think she had to tend to some children. Lisa
Yes.
and Mary is a yes.
Thank you all very much. I think I see two very happy principals
Thank you.
here.
Thank you so much.
Agreed, thank you.
So we'll let Ashley know. Ashley's going to be thrilled as well, and we'll talk tomorrow. I apologize. I have a sassy dog beside me.
And Lynn, Ashley's up to 30 cases at this point.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
We're tied at 15 each and we lead the pack
Wow.
in OSU.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Never would have guessed it.
So I have two more things for you. The next is the class size summary. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see the summary? Let me just move it over here. So what this is your principals gave individual reports. So I'm not asking you to do anything with this tonight. I'll email it to you after the board meeting. It's really just a summary of, by policy, the minimum average per policy is listed in the third column from the left. And we're tasked with looking at this by grade band for literacy, math, and all other content areas. So you can see the 4 Nmvuusd schools have reported out on what are their class sizes per teacher in each of their schools. This is really just informational. Any questions before I stop sharing? And then the last thing I have is I need a direction from the board. This is under other. We have, as Morgan indicated earlier, we have 2 administrators that are up. They do not have a successor contract right now, so they're due for negotiation. So I would ask the board, you told me to bring this back to you after the last negotiation round. Is the board intending to negotiate, or is the board intending to delegate that negotiation to me?
I think that I'm in favor of delegating the negotiation to you, Lynn, which is what we did the last time, but it would then be nice to then have you bring kind of your assessment to the board, obviously, before anything is finalized.
I think the same model that we used last time worked well for us because if I remember correctly, we had quite a discussion about it, and that's what we all preferred, although we might have some different board members right now have differing opinions. I'm not sure because we haven't talked to the new members at all, or new member.
So I think help remind me a little bit, Lisa, because there are really 3 different boards that have had me approach this a little bit differently at each board level. So was it that, did this board give me guardrails and then I came back, or did you have me come back and say, this is what I want to do, and then there was a conversation?
I think, and please correct me, Mary, or anybody else if I'm wrong, I think we had principals present us with an offer, and we discussed it as a board and gave you direction to negotiate that with the principal, and then came back to us with any final, yes, the principal was happy with what we landed on, or no, they would like something different. And that's what I'm remembering. Does anybody else remember better than me? Morgan, maybe?
I think that the SU board and the ER board both delegated that completely to Lynn with some conversation on guide rails. And my recollection is that you guys were interested last time around on exploring that, but last year it looked as you described. It was kind of the more traditional board negotiating with the the principals, and then maybe Lynn kind of did the final seal the deal away from the table.
I think
Yeah,
maybe,
Lisa,
yeah, I
oh,
think,
sorry.
no, that's okay. I think Morgan's right. And I just want to add that I think maybe the reason that we were not interested in handing the entire process over to Lynn is because some of us remember what it was like to negotiate with a lot of employees as board members, and also to make a lot of decisions that we no longer make as board members. And this was one of the last things that we really felt that we had control, I don't know if control, but input into in our local communities. And that is the hiring of the building administrator for our local school building.
Yeah, and I agree with Lisa. That is the way that, Lisa, you are remembering correctly. That's how we did it. And I thought that process worked well. It did not feel cumbersome. And I think it was an important way for us to kind of stay in the loop. And that would be my preference, to continue the way that we've done it.
So that being said, you have 2 administrators that are going to need to bring proposals to the December board meeting, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, and I will reach out to those administrators. I'm guessing they know who they are, but we'll make sure that they do. In terms of the last thing, I promise I forgot about this one, is just letting you know that we have hired the facilities director. Morgan tipped to that when he was going over the budget stuff. We're very happy. I think it was it just this week that he accepted, Morgan?
Yep, he's accepted verbally. We haven't gotten him in to sign the actual contract yet, but we're confident that's going to happen this week.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Hopefully we'll have more details at the FNESU meeting. That is all I have for you.
Great, thanks, Lynn. Okay, so moving on to principal reports. For Bakersfield, for Rhoda. Rhoda, do you have anything that you would like to highlight or add from your report? And do board members have any questions specifically for Rhoda?
I don't have anything to add, but happy to take questions, comments.
Your hair looks great, Rhoda.
Thank you.
I second that. It's lovely. Any other questions for Rhoda, her report? Okay. Lenny, do you have anything that you would like to highlight or add to your report?
Gotta remember to unmute. So we've been talking about we've been talking about the kindergarten number of students in there, and that's held steady. But we did have a family reach out to us saying that they were considering moving up to Berkshire from Connecticut. But there's not a clear timetable on that. They were kind of just making a check-in about the school, I guess. And we didn't say anything about our class sizes or any of that, or what it would mean if we added another kid. But it's just something that I definitely want to be aware of, and I'll keep checking in with Lynn. And I mentioned it to Morgan too, but we already had the approval from you guys to explore that. But at this point, it's still like this may happen, but I don't really have anything to work on. So it's still kind of a sit and wait situation as far as of picking up another child. And that was something I just learned about today, and I didn't even get a chance to really talk to Lynn about that because I learned about it after we kind of met today. So that's the only thing I have.
I spent hours with you today too.
I know.
Lenny, they have just the kindergartner or any high schoolers that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I didn't. The only thing we keyed in on was the kindergarten piece. So I didn't talk to the family directly. They spoke with the admin assistant. So
okay.
I'm not sure. And then the other thing I didn't put in my notes. Sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, no, I was gonna ask you about the lead process and the in pipes and the water situation.
Yeah, we recently got a plumber set up, and he visited the school, I think it was on Monday of this week, and they're working on creating a plan for when he can get to work on updating the faucets and fixtures, and we'll be scheduling most of that work to be done, or all of that work to be done when school is not in session, so like on weekends or after school hours, so it doesn't interrupt the classrooms.
Great.
So we'll see how that process unfolds. So it's now, at least we got a little bit of actual positive momentum on that. And the other thing I have to add that I didn't put in here, because we just got back to the plans on it, is connected, similar to some of the stuff Chrissy was talking about. We used to do a whole school community group. That was another way of building some connectedness in our school community. And we didn't do it last year because of COVID. And out of the famous words, out of abundance of caution, we had been slow to do such things during the start of this year. Plus, we were spending so much time just getting used to being together as a whole school in our classrooms. But we are going to be going back to doing those whole school community groups. And one of the first things we're going to be doing is something we did 2 years ago around Thanksgiving. The 2 days before Thanksgiving, our schools will be dedicating some acts of service where they're going to be working on preparing some meals for senior homes, and we're going to be working on creating blankets for the Linus Project for donations. And there's a few other, I don't have them off the top of my head, somebody else is in charge of planning it, but basically they're going to be spending 2 days kind of designing and making things to be donating out to various organizations. And we're also going to be having law enforcement, we're going to be making, I think, snacks or desserts for law enforcement to give that to them. And they're going to be visiting the school on one of those 2 days. So it's going to be kind of a chance to connect with the community and do something for the community, but also participate in that whole school community groups that we've kind of lost over the last 18, 20 months.
I just want to say that I really love what all of you principals are doing, and your staff with your students. You're all doing something different, but it's all really meaningful work in addition to educating kids about academics. It's fabulous. Thank you.
All right, and that's all I've got.
Thanks, Lenny. That's great. I really appreciate it. Sandy, you are up. Do you have anything that you'd like to add or highlight from your report?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Any questions for Sandy from the board?
We do have heat now, by the way. That was one good thing.
Oh, that's great. Fred's to the rescue, eh? Love it. That's
quite the circle of Fred's trucks in the parking lot this week.
They are
We
the
love
best.
Fred.
Yeah, love them. That's great. They do good work.
Yeah.
Good stuff. And Christy, I know you did your spotlight, but do you have anything that you would like to add or highlight from your board report?
The only thing that I didn't add, which I am surprised I forgot, is that we are recognizing students for one of the Bear Expectations. So instead of doing a student of the month, we have 5 Bear Expectations, and so we recognize them for those. So our first one is belonging. And we used to do a whole school meeting where we would recognize students there and invite parents. We decided not to do that this year. So we are calling down students just a couple grades at a time every morning during announcements. So they come down, we take a picture. So by the end of the week, we will have gotten through all of them. I will then put something together to send home to all parents, so that we can, still make it public, but not have to get together for it. So the belonging ones are really sweet to read, because it's all about, taking care of others and welcoming kids into the group and being kind and caring. So the kids are, what the teachers write about the kids is really very heartfelt. So it's the best one, I think.
Oh, I love that. That's lovely. Thanks, Christine. And I know, Gab, you're joining us tonight. Do you have anything that you'd like to share with the board about the virtual academy tonight?
Nope. I'll submit my report on
Okay.
Friday for the FNESU, and I don't have anything extra to add.
Okay, super. Just wanted to make sure.
Thanks for checking in.
Yeah, of course. So we're moving on then to our board business. Anyone have a future agenda item in their head right now that they'd like to mention? There's obviously plenty of time if you don't think of it tonight. And Morgan, we've talked briefly about it. Do you have anything further around the facilities director
I don't
update,
think
or
so.
just that
I'll
we're
put something
moving in
out
the
to the
right
board.
direction? What's
I'll put
that?
something out to the boards on Friday, I anticipate.
Okay, that sounds good. Emily, would you like to do a short SU board report?
I cannot. I was not there.
Oh my gosh, right, correct. And
Ah.
Kat's not here either. So that puts me in the hot seat. Lynn, will you help me kind of do a synopsis for the board around our last SU meeting?
Yes, I'm gonna pull up the agenda.
I know that would be helpful. I don't have it in front of me and I can't find it. So that would be helpful to jog my memory. I'm looking back at notes.
Did we ever change the time?
Of the SU meeting? No, I believe we're still at the 6th
Okay.
So
I
it's
think
for the SU meeting.
yeah, that will be an agenda item. I think we had meant to discuss
Right.
it. We were derailed. So okay.
Yeah. And is that of interest to you, Emily, to change the time back, push it back a little to the 6:30?
That would be helpful.
Yeah, it seems the general consensus that works with people's work schedules a little bit better.
We had 2 spotlights, Mary. I don't know if you want to say anything about Michelle Irish's equity spotlight, advancing educational equity, or Melissa's early ed director spotlight.
Yeah. Well, and we can certainly, I believe that Michelle sent that spotlight out to everyone on all the boards, but I can double check because it's really excellent and so would be helpful. I will either ask her or forward it myself to other NMV folks if they would like to see it. It was a good presentation about kind of our kind of moving forward with our equity initiatives throughout the SU. And Melissa, she touched on some of the things that she touched on in her spotlight from the SU meeting she spoke to tonight. It was somewhat the kind of impetus for having this kind of deeper dive and this closer look at our equity as it pertains to our early childhood programs.
Shared by the teacher staff retention and recruitment survey responses. It's the only thing out of the ordinary on mine.
Yeah, and we didn't have any significant action items that I am recalling from that last meeting. We're starting starting to look at budget and numbers similarly to how we are at the district boards. We did have quite a lot of public comment and visitors who came to the public service building to do public comment. I think that's about it for that meeting. And I'll go ahead and send folks Michelle's if you didn't. I'll double check who received it in that email and send it to anyone who didn't if you're interested. So it's quite good. It's excellent work. Anything else from board folks before we move toward adjournment? All right. Well, we'll be on the other side of the Thanksgiving holiday when we meet next. So I hope it's a lovely one for everyone with your friends and family. Stay healthy and well. I just need a motion then to adjourn.
I can make that motion.
Thanks, Erin. Everyone want to give me a thumbs up or a wave for adjournment? We good? All right. Everyone, be well. Thank you so much.